contradictory and also competitiveness in the field. So today we are going to discuss these themes. And unfortunately, normally our moderator is Dr. Arafat, but he came yesterday from Qatar and he is sick. That's why he couldn't join, and I am moderating the session. So I want to start with the Professor Wang Jinhui. So my question, Professor Wang, the Belt and Road Initiative, and my question is not only about Belt and Road Initiative, you can also discuss the other trade routes, global trade routes, and the regional trade routes as well. So, but we can focus on first. Belt and Road Initiative remains one of the most ambitious in structural and strategic visions of our time. Yet, its perception has evolved markedly in different regions. From your vantage point, how has the global narrative around Belt and Road Initiative shifted in recent years, particularly in light of heightened geopolitical tensions and rising concerns over strategic dependencies? As I am a scholar, when I am doing research about Belt and Road Initiative, it is really hard to find any academic sources 50 years ago about Silk Road even. But today, this concept is dominating global politics as well. So what's your angle about these cases and developments? The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for the question, and thank you for the opportunity to join this important discussion. And thanks to the audience for being here. It's a very beautiful campus and lovely people all gathering together to attend this very important, unique conference. About this question, from my perspective as a Chinese scholar, it's clear that the global narrative around the Belt and Road Initiative has become more complex in recent years. Over the past decade, the Belt and Road Initiative was widely welcomed as a surge of new infrastructure finance for developing countries. Early coverage highlighted highways, ports, and rail lines across Africa, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia. Projects that many governments lacked the budget to or technology to build them on their own. In Belt and Road Initiative, by now has brought many benefits to developing countries, like job creation, improved market access, and regional connectivity. Initially, many countries viewed it mainly as an economic opportunity, focusing on infrastructure and connectivity. Today, perceptions of BRI are sharply divided. Many global South governments still welcome Chinese financing, valuing the development impact and prioritizing economic need. Meanwhile, Western capitals in some emerging economies insist on stricter governance standards, more transparent bidding processes, and stronger environmental and social safeguards before launching new projects. However, recently, particularly with geopolitical tensions, which you have mentioned, and concerns about over-dependence, some regions, especially Western countries, have become more skeptical, framing Belt and Road Initiative in terms of strategic competition rather than economic development, rather than an initiative for cooperation. In Western capitals, Belt and Road Initiative came to be seen through a strategic lens. Concerns about China expanding its influence sparked debates in EU, in the US, and in India about strategic dependencies on Chinese-built infrastructure. But meanwhile, most low and middle-low income countries still will be Belt and Road Initiative as a practical source of investment in technology. They emphasize job creation and improved connectivity. So perceptions still differ widely. Many developing countries continue to see BRI as a crucial chance to improve infrastructure and economic development. So the narrative is becoming increasingly divided, reflecting broader geopolitical shifts. And China, I think, from my perspective of view, I think China can strengthen Belt and Road Initiative's image by leading on clear contracts, predictable loan terms, and open procurement processes. I think China needs to acknowledge and address these concerns by ensuring more transparency and emphasizing mutually beneficial partnerships to rebuild broader confidence. So, like, by inviting multilateral partners, such as regional development banks, independent auditors, and maybe some private investors to join into project, to join this whole project planning. I think Belt and Road Initiative can reclaim its identity as a development initiative rather than some sort of not existed strategic geopolitical tool.
Thank you very much. So I just move to second speakers, and then I will turn if you have time, and also we have Q&A session. My second question would be the Professor Gürol Baba. So the Professor Baba, if you have written extensively on regional power dynamics and defense diplomacy, given the increasing overlap between commercial corridors and geopolitical interests, how should we interpret the emergence of initiatives like the IMEC and INSTC? Are they primarily economic projects, or do they reflect deeper geostrategic rebalancing, particularly in the context of US, China, and India-Russia rivalries? So within that context, Professor Baba, normally these trade corridors should provide peace and development. But at the same time, there is a clear division and competition from the great powers. How do you understand this process? The floor is yours.
Thank you for organizing the event. As the previous session speakers said, it's very difficult to pull it up, but I think it's so far so good. I think anybody in this room wouldn't disagree that in today's global politics, almost nothing could have a single meaning. It could be an organization, an institution, a scheme, or even a statement. They do have multiple meanings. And this is not an exception for the IMEC and the INSTC. Let me abbreviate that abbreviation as the INS. Because in both of these, let's say, roads, the line between trade, infrastructure, and the power projection, the line separating these three, and even more, they have been blurred. I mean, these trade routes, they first reading, they sound like they are for connectivity and development type of, projects. But in actual sense, they are manifestations of, geopolitical and geostrategic rebalancing, which is a continuous construct. BRI extends, and new trade routes are, well, almost automatically coming up. And this is a basically continuous construct. Regarding the question, I can try to unfold the discussion, say, very short 4 titles. Well, the first one is the strategic intent of these roads. The second one could be the geoeconomic statecraft. The third one could be, as you just said, strategic rebalancing in multilateralism. And the fourth one, and probably the one that maybe we should discuss even more, is the institutional and the normative fracturing of global politico-economic governance. Well, the first one regarding the strategic intent, obviously, all of these roads, even the BRI itself, they focus on the concept of infrastructure. And infrastructure is not a neutral concept. It is a concept which paves the way for political influence, but not only that. Infrastructure also shapes regional order or orders, or they influence policy choices. They restrain the policy choices, or they open up new policy choices. And IMEC and INS, both of them with their peculiar focus on infrastructure, aims to give more facilitated policy choices against certain geopolitical overtures. IMEC, for example, is obviously more or less a US's Indo-Pacific aim trying to counterbalance China, especially in the Mediterranean and the Middle East. INS, on the other hand, with Russia and India, is more in the gray zone of this regionalization type of roads, trade roads, but they also try to give both India and Russia an instrument to diversify their strategic dependencies. For Russia, access the southern hemisphere, especially the Indian Ocean. For India, a path, a land path to Eurasia, bypassing Pakistan. So both of these, from this strategic intent, they try to give a hedging type of autonomy to their members. Very shortly, secondly, as the geoeconomy, both of these, say like new corridors, they try to dilute, not necessarily to control, but dilute the Chinese centrality in global politico-economic governance. And to what extent they will be successful, that we will see. The key point here, especially for the IMEC, is the underlining of the standard-setting details of the clash between the West and the non-West. You may narrow it down to US and China. Well, the third one is the multilateralism and the strategic rebalancing in multilateralism. We have two pillars here regarding the IMEC and the INS. The first pillar is the US-China, obviously. It gives a lens to instrumentalize India's swing state status in order to give India not only a larger area for maneuver, but almost as an instrument, quote unquote, against China. In the INS, well, as I say,
for the IMEC, I think it's not only negate China, but also Iran as well.
At the same time.
Yeah.
At the same time. But the reason why I am particularly emphasizing US is because IMEC has also a potential to complement this US Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment initiative. So please don't look at these two IMEC and INS type of roads or initiatives as like separate type of attempts. They have a certain level of complementarity for more global outreach. And the last one I would say, which we can talk maybe more today and tomorrow, is the fracturing. All these routes, although they have different names and they've got very shiny preambles, aims, attempts to give more of a opening to regional powers regarding trade governance and all that. Basically, they signal a more important divide, as emphasized in the question. Divide in the global trade governance. And in this fracturing, or these fracturing in general, actually is an initiator, if not an engine, for this new type of trade routes. Basically, as a conclusion, let me wrap it up very quickly. No neither IMEC nor INS are primarily economic initiatives. They show the instrumentalization of infrastructure almost as a tool of influence. Well, you can see even in the literature, these are called as the weaponization of infrastructure. The second one, as a conclusion, is we have been talking about interdependence for a long time, which is pretty much like a Western term. But today, these roads actually emphasize another important development, which is more current, which is strategic selectivity in trade. In more Western terms, more bilateralism. Lastly, we can say these roads also signal that connectivity is equals power today, not necessarily the military capabilities or other type of hardware capabilities, but today connectivity is actually power. I think I can stop here.
Thank you. So my third question to Professor Xie Yiqing. So, yeah, thank you. So my question is about Chinese supply chain resilience has become a focal point in light of global disruption from the COVID-19 pandemic to maintaining trade restriction. Could you reflect on the strategic adjustment Beijing is making to safeguard supply chain continuity, significant in sensitive sectors like technology and critical minerals?
Okay, so, kind of loud. I'm an economist, so I'll probably answer this question in a more economic perspective. So the idea right here is recently, China still, so Beijing still actually continue the previous policy starting from the 1978. You guys probably know Deng Xiaoping. So the reform and opening up. So if you see most of the catalog in the Chinese newspaper and the media, so we actually have a further announcement for we want to deepening the reform and carry on what we call the high quality opening up. The main reason is globalization itself actually did brings China out of poverty back like 45 years ago and into a certain type of prosperity. If you guys haven't have a chance to go to Beijing or Shanghai and anywhere in China. So therefore, we actually we admit that we enjoy the fruit of globalization. And during that period, as you guys probably know, that it's actually a really better time that both European Union at that time developed together with the United States. Actually, at that time, they postponed the GATT, later WTO, so they also want to have free trade. So with this trade, China developed very fast. But around like 2000, it's actually earlier than the COVID period. It's actually around like 2013, China already realized that our labor cost advantage significantly decreased. The wage rate increased more than 10 times, much more than 10 times. We used to be 0.2% of the US wage rate. I think 2013, we probably will be around like 13 to 14% of the US wage rate. And now it's actually probably 22% of the US wage rate. So we already significantly lost what we call the cost advantage. And if you guys are familiar with the development of East Asia, you guys probably know that we have something we call the evolution of the comparative advantage. So East Asian countries, like South Korea, used to produce like labor-intensive product, but they handed over to China. So therefore, China at this moment, around 2012, 2013, we probably want to find other way to further development, and also want to share the prosperity that globalization bring to China to the rest of the world. And therefore, you see that at that time we have a lot of new policies coming out. One is called the Belt and Road Initiative, Dr. Wang actually mentioned. The other is actually we also have the free trade zone inside China, try to attract like high quality foreign direct investment inside China. So the biggest problem actually started later on because United States actually initiated this kind of what we called high fence, small yard, this kind of policy, try to block the technology development of China. It makes perfect sense, right? Because our GDP size is getting larger and larger, and in real value, some of the year China's GDP, total GDP in real dollar is actually already surpassed the US level. Nominal value, we were about like 60 to 70% of the US level. But the idea over here is it's actually a very natural choice from the US perspective. But for China's perspective, we're still middle income country. Our GDP per capita is, I think this year is a little bit less than Turkish one, but previous years we are a little bit higher than. That's because your inflation rate and also the exchange rate policy is actually unstable. But the idea over here is we about like Turkish level. We have 1.4 billion people. We want to develop an economic perspective. Therefore, we can't stay happily with what we call the global supply chain. So China spent 20 years from the from the limited manufacturing, getting into what we call advanced manufacturing and services. You guys know that Western European countries, together with United States and Canada, they share the highest value added for the total GDP, world GDP. Their activity along this kind of period of the global supply chain is something we call innovative activities. So in order to bring this 1.4 billion people to the minimum line of what we call advanced economy, I believe this is actually the goal of China. We definitely have to go through what we call the innovative activity. That means technology is actually the key idea. So from the internal economic development perspective, it is also a natural choice for China to try to develop further in the technology part, abandon the relatively unskilled labor-intensive sector, such as textile and apparel and some like labor-intensive sector, and actually transfer that to some other less developed region as Japan and South Korea used to do, right? It's a very natural choice over here. This is our internal perspective. Externally, with the US tech bloc policy against China, we feel the pressure. Therefore, we actually have to search what we call technology independent over here. And if you guys were familiar with the economics literature, you guys know that the so-called high fence from the US perspective is a relative term. So how high the fence could be depending on how high your own technology is. So the fence would be relatively shorter, like lower, if the Chinese technology gets higher level. So you can only block a small amount if our technology level is similar to the US level. But if we are way lower, the fence can be high. So it's all a relative term. It's not only to China, but also to the rest of the world. So therefore, you can, in recent years, European Union also search for a certain type of technology independent, because everybody realized this relative fence the US could put on us, high or low, depends on how hard we try. So therefore, the Chinese government started a certain type of what we call industrial policy. So there's a long debate on whether the industrial policy is a good thing or a bad thing in the US economic literature, not the Chinese economic literature. So the finding is actually, one, it works. Okay, it works for many countries. And the second, who are actually applying industrial policy more often? Advanced economies. US, European Union, some like Germany, they apply the industrial policy more often and more successfully. So this is actually when United States trying to block Chinese technology, they have the what we call Endless Act, Endless Frontier Act, right? So this is also a type of what we call the industrial policy over here. So China did apply the industrial policy for some high-tech sector and trying to search internally technology independence, externally try to overcome the potential high fence over here. So that's why we developed very fast in a couple of years with the solar panel, the PV technology. We also have the new energy vehicle. It's really cool. It's so cheap. Buying a new energy vehicle is just like buying a cell phone, something like that. And we also developed significantly in the AI. You guys probably know DeepSeek, right? So, and we try to get more independence on the semiconductor sector that's related to the critical mineral, related to the high-tech independence. So this is actually what China do. So I want to bring out in a more economic perspective is externally we did face the conflicts or actually the pressure from US, and internally we want to actually develop our economic, we want to lead economic prosperity to a longer term and develop it further.
Thank you, Dr. Yiqing. And I want to move all these discussions to more political history perspective to Dr. Musab Iqbal, because when I was drafting this conference, and normally we didn't have the first session to focus on the more historical or conceptual things, but my expertise and background is always putting this perspective to each session. That's why I invited Dr. Iqbal, because to discuss the historical colonial process in the current issues, like between China and India, and also in the Middle East. So what's your perspective about the China-India trade routes and the nation building, even how it also determines our current conflicts?
First of all, I would like to say that I find it difficult to speak after lunch, and I find it more difficult to listen after lunch. So I thank you all for coming here and with your open eyes. And thank you, Saljuk, for inviting me. While I was walking up, I just looked at the theme again. It's great power. I am more a student of who look what is left under the debris of great power. That's what I am more interested in. I would like you to come with me to think that when we are thinking about great power, we are thinking in terms of old nation-state construction and sovereignties. And perhaps it's high time to think, as Yanis Varoufakis says in his new work, that we are entering into, or maybe entered into, age of techno-feudalism. Looking at Gaza, there are many ways of looking at Gaza, but one way is purely technological, and that's partly my interest as well. And when we are thinking of great power, we cannot limit ourselves to nation-state and sovereignties, and we have to start thinking that great power is also lying and moving towards technology. And there are technological sovereignties as well, which is shaping human being, not only the state. And might be the future will be that which machine is ready to fight your war. And we have seen in Gaza the deployment of AI, the big data, the selection of targets. In the recent last month, briefly lived, thankfully, conflict between India and Pakistan, we saw it was a battle of drones, unmanned aircraft, and we have seen this in many places. French philosopher Jean Baudrillard, in the context of Gulf War, said that the traditional purpose of war is over. War is an advertisement. And it is true, war is a new mode of communication after Gulf War of 1990s. I don't want to go into that direction, but I want to bring your attention to this point, that it is not only the subjugation of Palestinians and the question of occupation, but it is also an advertisement of new technologies, new weapons, new aircrafts, and billions invested into it, seeing whose air power is stronger, which drone is more powerful, and war then becomes a necessary show. It is a sad and grim reality, but we cannot deny that technological, in a way, is determining the political, and not the other way around. We think that we control the machine and the technological progress and development, but perhaps that's delusional. In the same way, ChatGPT is production of knowledge, is linked to production of knowledge. We know that knowledge and being are connected. In Arabic, we say ma'aloom and mawjood. The existence and what we know, the knowing and being are connected. And what we know and how we know determines the orientation of the being. So ChatGPT and the war of ChatGPTs from China and US and other countries might jump into production of knowledge through algorithmic process. We will also see the shift in the orientation of the being. So that's the preliminary remark I wanted to make. I wanted to make one more remark about the current situation in Gaza. As one of my close old friends said, the sad reality is that every country wants to become Israel, every great power, to have that technological control, power, subjugation, screening, and delineation of population, segregation. This is why there's a rise of digital authoritarianism as well. And we see the rise of authoritarianism because Israel also inspires great power. Again, it's a sad reality, but nonetheless a reality. And this is why you will see among the authoritarian regimes and their followers great support for Israel. Pankaj Mishra has recently written a book on Gaza. It's not an academic work, it's an intellectual work nonetheless, and which highlights this point, that there is a longing to control and dominate technologically. So these are my quick preliminary remark out of my pay grade in a way, because I was invited in a panel on India and China and trade, and I must confess that I'm not competent enough to talk about it. The point about imperial legacy, as someone rightly put about South Asia, that the modern post-colonial South Asia is a result of bordering, ordering, and othering. And these are the three things which defines modern South Asia. And if you look at the border, the way independent India inherited a colonial border from China, starting from the McMahon Line, and the wrong maps were shown of Tibet to the British, by the Britishers to the Chinese, and hence the problem begins there. And that is unsettled debate. We know that India shares 3,880-kilometer long border with China. And this is the dispute. And the dispute got quite serious 4 years ago in 2020, when casualties also happened. And since then, there is a massive deployment of army there, and it's increasing and becoming permanent from both sides. And we saw recently what happened between India and Pakistan. And again, these are the colonial legacies which lives on and perpetuates itself. It is important to note both points. It lives on and perpetuates. It reproduces itself in the entire region without thinking that one is guilty or another is innocent. I think the region is shaped by the reality and being reshaped again and again. Sankaran Krishna wrote in 1993 a very interesting piece on the body politic of India and called India Cartographic Anxiety. And this cartographic anxiety is kind of determining the Indian relationship with Pakistan and China and overall reality of the region. And this cartographic anxiety goes two ways. One, because the maps are not settled, boundaries are not settled. Even with Nepal, there are problems. Even with China, there are problems on both sides, on the Tibetan side, and then Arunachal Pradesh, south of China, which is south of Tibet, according to China. And China recently renamed some of the villages of Arunachal Pradesh in India. And again, the tension is there. Same with Pakistan and the Kashmir conflict. Same with Bangladesh. And there is a massive border and migration issue there as well. So this cartographic anxiety is central, and that is the imperial legacy, colonial legacy, and which lives on and perpetuates and without end in sight in some ways. And this cartographic anxiety goes another way as well. It is important for a modern nation state to find who is outside the border, but also to see who is inside the border who doesn't belong. That's the European discourse, that's the American discourse, that's the discourse in most part of the world. And that's also, in case of India, is a cartographic anxiety. And this is why the bill in 2019 passed by the right-wing government on the Citizenship Amendment Act which restrict the citizenship of Muslims from the region, which essentially means that there is a two-tier citizenship. It means there is someone inside which is not insider, again creating anxiety about the nation state. It's interesting again that...
And also the last point.
Yes.
The interesting point would be the last point, I guess.
When the war was happening between India and Pakistan, obviously the headline covered that. But what it missed, what is going on parallelly, there were news about Rohingya being thrown in the sea. And Assami citizens who are doubted to be Bangladeshis are left in the forest by the Indian authorities, or left on Indo-Bangladesh border as a no man's land. Again, showing the anxieties of power, but also how power is operating in terms of what they see as one who does not belong. So I will just come to the last point when we talk about India and China. The Indo-China relationship, obviously both see themselves, both India and China, as a civilizational state. Both see themselves as civilizational power. India, especially under Modi, thinks of it herself as a Vishwaguru, the global teacher. But the relationship is very much determined by the border, by the Chinese relationship, and obviously Belt and Road Initiative, highly cynically seen by Indian regime. Also, I would kind of think that we also need to state clearly that regime and states, it's not always people. And that distinction is obviously obliterated by great powers. That power wants to take all the sovereignty and authority, making other people powerless or voiceless. And that's why one of the acts of resistance is always to speak for yourself. So obviously we try to bring a parallel between India and China, but it is not the same. Chatham House published an interesting report last month about India and China and the future of the world, because this is 40% of the population and two greatest economies we are talking about. And it's a very interesting thing it notes is that there is an asymmetry of power, but there is an asymmetry of perception as well. The way Indian sees the Chinese do not see the Indians in the same way. And that asymmetry is also very interesting to look at and to explore. I will stop here, and if there are questions, we can pick some of the things. Thank you very much.
Points. And our last speaker is Professor Dr. Mehmet Özkan from the Turkish National Defense University. Dr. Özkan, you have analyzed Turkey's engagement with both Eastern and Western-led connectivity initiatives. Given the recent momentum behind the India-Middle East-European corridor, how do you interpret Turkey's positioning? Is there a recalibration in favor of IMEC over Belt and Road Initiative, or is Ankara adopting a more hedging-oriented approach? And also, Dr. Özkan recently published a book about new powers in the world politics. So can you also engage this question to other powers as well? Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for organizing such a timely conference. Let me start by saying first how Turkey repositions itself, then I can go to the rest of the question. First, I think Turkey, first as a location, Turkey repositions itself either as a center or the intersection of all the trade routes, as a location, by geographic location. But also intellectually, Turkey repositions itself as the voice of the non-West in the West, which means one foot in the non-West, the other foot in the West, because structurally Turkey is part of the West, either through trade or institutions, NATO and all the institutions. So, I mean, sometimes location-wise, it gives advantage to Turkey, but intellectual-wise, sometimes, I mean, they may question, they may debate. So, and also Turkey may get punished through different actions from the West and other things. So based on these things, I mean, Turkey tries to define its trade routes in the region. When you look at the region, for example, in today, I mean, you see Turkey is focusing on Central Asia, an even engagement to the Middle East, to Europe, to East Mediterranean. So you see all the dimensions at the same time, because Turkey is trying to follow a 360-degree foreign policy, trying to engage and relocate itself at the intersection. The case, for example, development corridor with Iraq, for example, that has been discussed for several years. This is extremely important. Turkey is paying so much attention. It's supported by Iraq. And this development corridor is connecting between Turkey to the southern side. On the other side, Turkey is pushing for the Zengezur corridor to open the Central Asia. That's another corridor that Turkey tries to connect. Yes, there are obstacles there are issues there, but Turkey is focusing on that. And the other one, I mean, after 8th of December 2024, when the regime of Bashar Assad fall down in Syria, there is possibility another corridor and connection from there through perhaps between Turkey, Syria to Gulf. So that would be another issue perhaps. The fact that the future of Syria is not clear yet in terms of security and other issues, but that will come to the point. But Turkey per se is not against the Belt and Road Initiative and supporting that process. But IMEC is a different issue. I think IMEC issue is sort of the fact that leaves Turkey outside of the line should be seen in two angles. First, it serves Indian interest and Israeli interest. Basically, it's a political project rather than the trade road. How helps India? The fact that is likely to develop relation between India and the Gulf countries that will create a pressure on Pakistan, possibly that pressure will lead to Pakistan recognizing even Israel. So that's one dimension. And at the same time, because it serves both Gulf and Israel, because that will isolate Pakistan and that will deepen the relation between Gulf and Israel. So that's more political oriented project than the trade route. But of course, I mean, let's see what will happen, because as you see in the region last several years, I mean, since the 7th of October, then 8th of December, and lastly 13th of June, 3 days ago, there are lots of developments in the region that I think nobody knows what will happen, what type of order we would have in future, Iran and Israeli war, and of course the genocide in Gaza, what would happen. So all these dimensions, I think, are the key that will define the possible. But when you look at Turkey is trying to play in all regions. In Europe, there's a new channel that's opening recently with this Ukraine issue and everything. There is a new lines. Turkey is focusing on even renegotiating custom union and everything. And same with Central Asia, as I mentioned, Middle East, Eastern Mediterranean. So Turkey is trying to play in all regions, trying to keep the cards in all regions. But the fact that the region is in hot wire now, I mean, the region is exploding, literally, with all the problems that nobody sees what will happen in three months later or 6 months later. Of course, I mean, first security is becoming important. Turkey is focusing on that side. But in a sense, I think IMEC is not a realistic perspective. BRI, yes, and these Turkey's corridor initiatives in different regions, probably they will connect. There is a chance they may connect with BRI or the other links. But itself, I mean, as I see, the IMEC is not really, I mean, it's more discourse than, it's likely to be more discourse than reality.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Mehmet Özkan. So I have more questions, but I want to take a Q&A, open the Q&A session. So if anyone has any question, please raise the hands and start. Yeah, Professor. Arkadaşlar. Yes, the mic is coming, please. And please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Dr. Murat Sevenci. I'm from Üsküdar University, Strategic Research Center. Ms. Wang, I would like to ask one question that we received from our researchers, that the Turkish private elite, the businessmen, saying that, you know, if there is a road from China to Europe, so there is a worry that, you know, let's say train road, okay, so railroad takes all the Chinese good to the Europe in 10 days, and it will go back as open because we don't have enough to sell. So, and this asymmetric relation worries the businessmen here. So this requires some technology transfer or Chinese investment in Turkey or in the other countries, let's say. Is there an intention and is there a policy towards these kind of, how should I say, investment easing up? So my second question is to Ms. Shi. So now there are two electric car companies intending to invest in Turkey. And we just received out, I don't know whether or not you heard the news, that European Union is issuing anti-dumping tariff on the hard plates. I don't know how to say contraplaque. So is there anyone who knows? Hard plates, foods, they call it contraplaque in Turkey, but I don't know the English of it. I'm sorry on that. Okay, so, but there is an anti-dumping tariff issue, and that would expand. If this is expanding to all Chinese goods, what do you think about the investing, the Chinese investment, direct investment to Turkey? The third question to Mr. Mehmet Özkan, I'm sorry, that, you know, in the strategic papers of Turkish Republic from the presidential office saying that seeing Turkey as just a logical, just pass-through country. So it's not intending to put Turkey as the, you know, the just a hub, but not production and resalesment duty. So in that case, how this not seeing Turkey as the production hub, but just the transfer hub would affect the Turkish industry near future?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
First, we can start with Dr. Wang. Yeah.
You just said that if there is one railway, transportation railway from China to Europe or Turkey, and Chinese could sell our goods to Europe and Turkey, and you're worrying that there is nothing to come back to China because you have... Okay, maybe some people worry about that European countries in Turkey doesn't have more goods compared with Chinese exports to European countries. They have not so much goods to sell to China. But actually, I want to say Chinese government of country is fully opened, totally open to any European countries, actually to every country in this world, because we want to develop globally. That's what is our real intention. We don't want other people to see Belt and Road Initiative as a geopolitical tool, but we all the real thing we want is to convey our global development initiative. And you see that the trade between Russia and China has tripled actually in recent years. And we don't want the world to see that we only be friends with Russia. We want to be friends with all countries which share common values, which want to develop globally. We don't want to be like the owning giant great power in this world. We want to, like Professor Gürol mentioned in the early session, that 天下大和, it means that global development initiative. And I think Chinese people kind of love Turkish goods. Like you actually have a lot of things could export to China. I think Chinese government can support you with financial investment, and I think you actually could find more opportunities to get into Chinese market. You just don't worry about that.
Thank you. So the second answer from the Dr. Xie.
Okay, so this should be a good news for Turkish people if EU really actually issue anti-dumping tax on the made in China product, right? So we welcome as from the China perspective, okay, we had this kind of history, right? So both United States and Japan actually invested a significant amount of like foreign direct investment in China. They produce in China. We have to say that U.S. is a good one in this way because U.S. firms did localization strategy very well compared to Japanese firms. So if EU trying to issue anti-dumping tax on made in China product, that means Chinese manufacturing have all those firms whenever we're doing FDI into building up like a new energy vehicle company in Turkey, something like that. That means we have to do localization. We are forced to do localization to the Turkey. That means there will be more voluntary technology transfer from China to Turkey. There will be more job opportunities happening in Turkey because we cannot import much more materials or intermediate imports from China. And that means we will help wherever we are actually making foreign direct investments, like a more complete supply chain of the same product, right? So this should be a good thing. So I didn't see anything bad if the EU against Chinese product. For example, Mexico also see as a chance that U.S. actually make sure that under the NAFTA that so any car made in Mexico has at least 80% of the intermediate inputs and components produced within the North America. So this actually use camp, right? So under basically Canada, United States, and Mexico. That means whenever China set up like a new energy vehicle company in like Mexico, we have to completely transfer the production into North American region. And apparently United States and Canada are not cheap enough for us to do that. So apparently Mexico would be the highest beneficiary for this kind of like anything against China. Okay.
Thank you.
So this is actually my answer.
Thank you. Professor Özkan, can Turkey be a hub of production or hub of transport?
Look, I mean, being a transit country, it's a good question. But I think being a transit country itself, if you take it as a passive transit country, it's a different story. But when you talk about the trade routes and everything, trade routes basically brings stability and security to the country, because if any instability happens in that area, in the region in general, many countries are affected. So in that sense, being transit country is not a big problem. I think that's what Turkey is trying to locate itself in terms of energy transition and different transition, that's fine. The discussion on Turkish economy, to transform Turkish economy from more, production-oriented economy, that's a different discussion. Yes, I see there are some process on that, but that's a long-term process, so that's a different discussion.
Thank you. So any other question? Please introduce yourself.
I'm Mehmet Yaşar Altunda. I work in media. I have a question for Ms. Yang, Ms. Yiqing, because China successfully implemented Made in China 2025, and we see it in EVs, batteries, etc. And now they have a new strategic plan for China 2035, and now they focus on deep ocean mining, satellites, semiconductors, etc., and medicine, robotics. So on the one hand, China had a very deep issue. The cost of investment rises, and the West closes technological ties to China. But on the other hand, China had developed a robust technological capacity. So how do you evaluate the China 2035 vision, the strategic vision, and what kind of new policies China adopt to achieve the most innovative technologies? Thank you.
Okay. Yes,
So
you can
it's
start.
my question again, right?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, okay. So from the question, I think it's my question. So my last name is Xie. If you want to travel in China, you probably want to learn this character, because if you double that, that means thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So the idea over here is we have been raised a lot of like Made in China 2025 and Made in China 2035. So this is actually a kind of a vision from the China perspective of like building up like high technology. A lot of the I don't know, a lot of people from the Western society typically would perceive this is actually a strategic plan from the central government of China. Okay, because I'm Chinese, I'm living in Shanghai. It's apparently a stereotype thinking. So what I would say that Chinese government is actually, CPC government is actually a pretty responsible government. I'm not CPC membership, so I'm not a CPC member. So, but from my perspective, I think CPC government is actually a really responsible government. So the Made in China 2025 and Made in China 2035, this kind of a vision is actually based on the true economic development and technology development of the stage. So China is a more centralized, politically it's more centralized. Therefore, the central government will actually give some like what we call the policy guidance, try to encourage some of the fast advanced region, for example, Shanghai. And I don't know how many guys ever been to Kunshan. This is actually one of the richest county in China that is neighboring Shanghai. So Shanghai, Kunshan, and Shenzhen. I don't know how many guys your kids play this drawing. Very fancy one. The best technology is actually Dajiang. It's actually from Shenzhen. You know, Huawei is also from Shenzhen. So you see that with the economic development, we have like regional imbalances of not only the economic development, but also the technology development. The coastal area like Shanghai, Kunshan, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, if you've been there, you know that the high tech actually developed super fast. Therefore, the Made in 2025, the China Made in China 2025 and the Made in China 2035 is not only a vision, but also a encouragement from the central government level to make all those entrepreneurs from the coastal area to further develop the technology independence to improve economic prosperity. So of course, there's some side effects, right? So all the less developed economic region also want to follow the Made in China 2025. Therefore, our President Xi Jinping actually made an announcement, I think, last year, and literally mentioned that each city should not copy. So we cannot have photocopy of each city because the endowment is different, economic development level is different. So every city should, based on their own existing industry, existing technology level, to think about how to develop the high tech. I think there are a lot of vision happening over here as well, right? So the vision 2030 from the GCC countries, right? So there's a lot of vision going here, but for China, I think this high-tech vision is more like to trying to encourage the entrepreneurs of the coastal area, mostly private firms actually. Mostly private, for example, Tencent, Alibaba, they're all private firms, and Dajiang also private firms, so mostly private firms, to give them confidence that the central government back up them to develop further and making relatively riskier high return like R&D projects. This is actually from my local, I'm a local Chinese, right? From my perspective, I'm a local Shanghainese. I think that's actually what's really going on.
Hello, I'm Mehmet Fatih. I'm a master's candidate at Geneva Graduate Institute. So this conference theme is based around competition, great power competition between different actors. I want to flip it a little. So we have been discussing the potential of China as the first link and the hub of supplying the global supply chains. And BRI and IMEC puts India and China in opposing sides of bidding for this role of hub of supply chains. So my first question is directed to Dr. Musab Iqbal. Is this adversariality is rooted in colonialism or from the first conceptualization of the state building of India and China? And my second question is for the rest of the panel, whoever would like to answer it. Today and in the future, can this adversariality and this competition be overcome so that maybe more added value is produced for the rest of the world?
Thank you. So.
Oh, okay, sorry. I mean, as we know, that the game of power is never straightforward, and there are contradictions inherent in every relationship. So yes, the border, from an Indian perspective, the border question is very central for them to have a better relationship with China. But at the same time, there is a trade relationship which is being pushed by the business lobby in India. And there is massive trade deficit as well. I mean, I think India imports roughly $120 billion of Chinese goods and exports only $20 billion. So there is almost a deficit of $100 billion. And India relies a lot on Chinese material for its own manufacturing and supply chain and industry. So there is an inherent tension where India wants to settle the border dispute, the political dispute, and then sort of fully commit to the trade. But at the same time, there are trade compulsions which go on and off, and there are business lobbies which are pushing. But you also have to see that there is a political narrative in India which is also determining international relations and trade as well. So after this whole thing in Pakistan, between India and Pakistan, and it brings a lot of interesting debates and questions which in public sphere, and also shows how political compulsion domestically dictates the relationship internationally.
Thank you. For the next second question, Gürol Baba, yeah, we can start with you.
All right. I think the way we are looking at the concepts here in this room, pretty much we are caught up, including me myself, is in the, I would say, without quotation marks, a Western perspective. When we are talking about being adversaries, the way we conceptualize being an adversary from a Western perspective doesn't necessarily fit into the non-Western perspective. The talking about hegemony or the hegemonic discourse, it doesn't necessarily fit into the non-Western perspective. The only reason why we cannot necessarily refer to non-Western perspectives because they are not very well disseminated and established in the literature. So when we say adversary, everybody would understand the same thing because we are looking at it from the same window. But in actual fact, today in this panel, we are talking about another concept. We didn't really underline it, but it is hybridity, or in other words, hybrid type of rivalry, which is not going to go anywhere. And it shouldn't go anywhere because if you look at it from a very basic IR perspective, both the liberals and the realists, they look at this concept, this hybrid rivalry, both from the perspective of profit and power, which is pretty much the, the discussions of this panel. It's going to sustain. It's not going to go anywhere. So we shouldn't expect that this wide variety of trade routes is going to bring an end to the Western understanding of being an adversary. No, they won't, because they're not looking for it. They are looking for a constant construct of rebalancing. Well, they're going to rebalance one multilateralism in one sub-region, and another type of problem is going to pop up in another region. This is what the political history and the history of international relations tells us. So basically, if you put the world or the global politics performance practices from like binary divisions of US versus China, West versus the non-West, we will be caught up in the same trap. But in actual sense, if you look at the Asian international relations from a political economic perspective, I live in Kunshan, so I understand what you're talking about. But people who've never been to Kunshan wouldn't understand what you're talking about, the type of development. This is the type of perspective that we need to change. It has been changing, but very, very slowly. It's going to take a bit more of a time that the literature would recognize to look at the world, actually the global politics from a non-Western lens?
So, Gürol, and I want to ask that question to all panelists. If our audience has a question, I want to give a space, or I would ask my question. Any question? So when I'm listening to all these discussions, and I remember one of the books which has been written recently by the Professor Ayşe Zarakol from Cambridge University, and she is basically asking, after the defeat, how East learned to live with the West. But my question is about the 15th century. When the Istanbul conquered, the trade route even changed after that, because Pope also banned the trade with the Ottoman Empire, and Ottoman Empire was dominating all trade routes from east to west. So the age of exploration started, colonialism started. So the question is to change our historical discourse as well. The how West learned to live with the East after the defeat, and which type of the world system we are living. If we ask this question, then what will be new narrative to our current state system, current all discussions, and how this our current trade route discussion is going to change also world politics as well. So I think it will be a bit complex question, but if anyone wants to answer, so.
I mean,
Go ahead.
Obviously, this is an important and complicated question, but from a very intellectual or knowledge production, although knowledge production is a problematic term, it's also a very secular modernity. Knowledge is not produced in certain tradition, it's passed, it's kind of inspired. But anyway, without going into the semantic debate about it, but nonetheless, I think one thing is decentering these binaries, decentering these East versus West, or Islam versus West, or China versus India, and all these categories. And I think re-questioning the category, re-questioning and decentering where the power exactly is, and produce multiple narrative. I think it was a very important point Professor made about adversarial. It is framing of India as a China, as opposite to China, and being projected in a way in the Western media or Western discourse that India is there to counter the Chinese rise of China and this narrative. So I think the decentering of narrative, the multiplicity of narrative is one way always to challenge any kind of power, that you do not have one narrative, and obviously you need an opposite narrative. But if you start producing multiple narratives, to live in a world which is not dominated by one power, as someone was saying rightly that there are not only 5 countries which can determine the fate of the... It's also interesting from a media scholar perspective, is that in the West, when they say the world, it means 7, 8 countries. I mean, if you look at Guardian, for example, and you go, what the world press said about this, and you will see Sweden, Russia, Sweden, England, France, US, Canada. This is the world press. So there's no China, there's no India. So vast majority is out. And this construction of world is very rampant in the everyday discourse. And we also inherited, because there is a colonial gaze. We look at ourselves from a Western perspective. Like a feminist scholar, Laura Mulvey, says that female gaze, male gaze, a woman do not see herself directly into the mirror. She always sees herself through a male perspective. And that's how she appears in front of camera, in front of the world, and what she called male gaze. And this male gaze is extended to the colonial gaze. We also want to appear as the West wants us to appear, or the power wants us to appear. So one way is to decentering those gazes, decentering those binaries and categories, and having the plurality of opinion, vision, and plurality of narratives as well.
I think in terms of global trade routes, I mean, we are now at the down of the early stage of the, again, 15th and 16th century. Now, yes, what's happening, I mean, especially with the North Pole, is the opening for the global trade route recently. As you see, many countries, they are focusing on that. Now, some countries, they are using ice-breaking ships to open the North Pole. That is the shortest way to the Europe. As global warming is actually reshaping the global trade routes. So in that sense, the more war we have in these trade routes, in the Hormuz, in different places in the southern part, I think northern pole will be much more important, and it will no longer be only military, also trade will increase. That's why Central Asia and all the north part, that will be much more important as the global warming continues, as the war continues. I think in that sense, we are on the brink of a little transformation, as if early stage of the 15th, 16th century. That's happening in front of us.
Just one point, I'm sorry to take your time, but just to look at the story of printing press and how it has been told in the West and also in the modern world about Ottoman relationship with the printing press. And it is a very problematic story which has been told that the Ottomans kind of denied and they were late, and this is why they were late to the party of progress and modernity. But this whole retelling of history is required with development, with progress, and with other things. And if someone goes and spends some time to look at how in the West the story of printing press has been told up and the relationship with the Ottoman kings, it is an interesting tale to look at how and still people buy that, and reformist writing in subcontinent and other places would say, oh, Turkey was left behind because they were not accepting the printing press. But the whole story is problematic, the whole history, and so on, and you can give a number of examples in that case.
Absolutely, and also we are like if you look at the old books, the Western domination and hegemony starts from the 16th century. But in the reality, colonialism spread from the Latin America, Africa, and in East Asia, but in the Indonesia, Malaysia, not of course China, not of course Russia, not of course Iran or Ottoman Empire till the 19th century, early 19th century. So that's why the Professor Sharman recently published Empires of the Weak. So the colonialism started in the weak geographies. So of course, Ottoman Empire, Iran, China, India, always the part of the history, but always neglected in the history. Yeah, Professor Xie Yiqing, do you want to highlight anything in that case?
Yeah, so actually China suffered this most, right? So, because the way we are actually from the Far East, and we actually never experienced any colonized period before. So the way we are trying to express ourselves does not fit into the Western media at all. And even I'm in China, right? So when we're reading because I had my PhD study in United States, so therefore I received a lot of like the posts from the Western media. When I read that, there's something pretty crazy talking about China all the time. But the idea is it's actually very difficult for China's voice to be really heard to the rest of the world. I guess probably a similar problem will happen to India as well. So I think that what China's government did really good is we try to behave ourselves for our own economic development, making people better. So we did not take the Western media judgment on ourselves at all. So a lot of the policy, we never follow anyone else. We just follow what actually really happened. Because after reform and opening up, we believe that truth would only be proved through practical practices. So the idea over here is the good thing for the Chinese government right now is we did a really good job in behaving ourselves, so trying to produce a significant amount of products. When we see the environmental problem happening in China, we correct them very quickly. I don't know how many guys been to China in 2013. It was a nightmare when I went back to China in 2013. But now the air get clean again. We shifted from the previous problem very quickly to get rid of the mistake. Every country made mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Get rid of the previous, the fast economic development period, the pollution issue. Now you go to Beijing, the sky blue again, not like the previous Western media that's totally blurred Beijing. So the idea over here is this is actually what Chinese government did very well. But one thing we have to admit is we still, because right now it's actually all the style of how Western media had the talk. The way we're trying to express ourselves, I think that there's still, we probably have to talk in the Western language first, I guess. And then when people really see what China is, and then we can gradually transfer to the Eastern language we used to have, right? So I think that's probably later stage. we probably will actually, this is actually also the reason that many Chinese firms, multinational firms, they going abroad, they not only produce in the local, in the host country, they also trying to bring up the standard into the international standard. Therefore, gradually we can actually transfer our voice to the rest of the world. But this is still a long way to go, and it's not my major, so.
Thank you very much. Professor Gürol.
I mean, regarding the political and the economic sphere, well, I think the main problem is a symmetrical coexistence, which hasn't been happening in global politics for a long time. Basically, countries enjoy to be asymmetrical towards their neighbors, towards their partners. In trade and politics even, international law gives us some devices to have coexistence through treaties, partnerships, agreements, etc. So on the political and the economic side of things, that type of, symmetrical coexistence can happen, although it doesn't, but it can happen. Some institutions try to provide that. But when it comes to the normative sense of symmetrical coexistence, well, it doesn't happen. US has been enjoying, well, you may say dominance, you may say hegemony or whatever, and this is a real enjoyment, huh? Even if you look at New Zealand vis-a-vis the little Pacific islands around New Zealand, you can even see in the New Zealand foreign policy that there is a little bit of an enjoyment of being asymmetrical over these small states. Funny though, but real. So when it comes to this normative understanding of being an adversary, enemy, ally, partner, things get muddled. From the non-Western side of, normative understanding of concepts and interactions, they don't fit, as I said just before. There is one initiative, though, when we see these normative turning points, we always look at in the history what real, well, I would say, great powers actually take on. For example, what the United States did after the Second World War to create that new normatism. So today, we are sort of seeing a testing ground from the Chinese perspective, which is the Global Civilization Initiative. Huh? But it is not necessarily, how would I say, very much so pronounced, but it is a testing ground. Huh? So if you are looking for a more of a symmetrical normative coexistence, we should again look at China. Interestingly, always China refuses to be an hegemon. If you look at the Chinese foreign policy statements, that's what you see. Check out China in the Middle East, you don't see it. Check out China in Africa, you don't see it. In Central Asia, you don't necessarily see it. So in that type of turning point, bringing non-West more into a more profound position, again, we need to look at China.
Thank you. But it's not the first initiative, as you know, about civilization, because the Muhammad Khatami also initiated in 1999, and Turkey and Spain also initiated that civilization, alliance of civilization in 2007 or 9, between President Erdogan and President Zapatero. So thank you for that remarks, and last perspective from the Professor Wang. So do you want to highlight anything about the historical perspective to trade routes and the colonial approach?
Well, I actually want to add.
Okay.
I've got something else to say about that. Many scholars now argue that Belt and Road initiatives is both an economic project and geopolitical tool. And I understand why some scholars might see it this way, but as a Chinese scholar, I don't fully agree with seeing Belt and Road Initiative to a geopolitical tool. And I just want to say that from China's perspective, the Belt and Road Initiative is primarily an economic cooperation framework under the broader conception of global development initiative. Its core aim is to build infrastructure, enhance connectivity, and create economic opportunities, especially for developing countries that have been historically overlooked. And critics point out that building like deep sea ports and maybe some undersea cables have a strategic side effect, but a side effect is very different from intentions strategic geopolitical tool. In BRI's open access model with more than 150 countries signing the contract, cooperation agreements with China, it demonstrates that these projects are driven by a real, genuine demand. And host governments invite Chinese partners to invest because they need infrastructure, they need financial support, and China is welcome to help them to develop their own countries. And international actors actually can best interpret Belt and Road Initiative by looking at outcomes rather than motives. When roads shorten travel times, energy, projects light up villages in many developing countries, or trade corridors driven by drive export growth, these are real development wins. If partners want to guard, they won't guard against any strategic misuses, then I think the solution lies in, for all the countries, the solution lies in not only to China, but the solution lies in transparency, like joint oversight and multilateral engagement, tools that strengthen trust without undermining BRI's primary goal of shared economic progress. Yeah, thank you.
So if there's another question, we can open, but otherwise I will end the session. And thank you for joining us. While Professor Ersal Aydın in the previous session, he highlighted that the current developments is very much different than historical process. So, but we discuss history a lot here. But thank you very much for contribution to different angles, and thank you for joining us. We have, by the way, cafe break. Next, Özge Erasan Hall would be the cafe.